Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 53rd ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Seattle Seahawks reporter Brian Nemhauser. Brian, it's great to have you on.
It's great to be here, Matthew. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I love to hear that, and let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
Well, that's kind of a more complicated answer than you might think. I grew up loving sports. I played basketball, baseball, soccer, and my friends and I basically that's all we talked about. It was sports, maybe girls now and then, but for the most part sports. And so I went to school with the intent of being a sports writer and got a journalism degree and then decided that I didn't think it was going to be a well compensated job for especially for the amount of work and the amount of hours I was going to have to put
Yeah.
in. So I decided to do something else. And so I spent 26 years working in the technology industry, and it was only last year at the ripe old age of 49 that I decided to go full time into covering the Seahawks. So really, like I said, complicated answer, but I've always wanted to do it, but I really did it the last year.
Yeah, and speaking of this last year, 3 weeks ago, you got to interview the Seattle Seahawks head coach Mike McDonald at the NFL Combine. Can you just describe what this opportunity was like, considering the fact that obviously you're an entirely independent sports journalist and you just recently got back into the journalism industry?
I mean, it was great. Mike's a great guy. I think he's a great coach. And, we've had an opportunity to kind of develop a rapport over the last year, doing press conferences and in between. And, um, the fact that I took the time and the expense to go to the combine as an independent journalist and
Mhm.
interview, over 100 different prospects and
Yeah.
and get all that up there. I think one of the things you learn is that the team and the PR staff wants to kind of encourage and reward that kind of coverage of what's going on. So they had actually brought over John Schneider, the GM, the day before, and I happened to be covering the Pete Carroll press conference, so I missed it. But they were nice enough to bring over Mike the next day, and it was great to talk to him in that environment.
Yeah, now recently you received national attention on ESPN, and I want to get into this a little bit.
Sure.
Recently on your YouTube channel, you spoke with Demarcus Lawrence, who recently signed with the Seahawks. A
Hmm.
clip from that interview ended up getting over 20 million views across various social media platforms. And in that interview, Lawrence stated, Dallas is my home, but I know for sure that I'm not going to win a Super Bowl there. What was it seeing? What was it like seeing how much virality this clip ended up gathering? And you being featured on SportsCenter after that.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a
Mhm.
fun experience, and you know, I'll be honest with you, Matthew. I don't do this for clicks and viral
Yeah.
moments and all that stuff. I mean, it's a fun experience to see it just blow up, and it was also something new in the sense that I had to negotiate rights for all these different, NFL Network
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
ESPN to use my clip and
Mhm.
to kind of learn which platforms were ethical in how they did it and which platforms
Mhm.
weren't. And it was actually really encouraging to see ESPN and NFL Network, agree to put my URL over the clip as opposed to, you talked about the clip that's gotten over 20 million views.
Mhm.
That's not on my account. So,
Yeah. Yes.
someone else gets those views. And, that's unfortunate, but it's also just the way these things work. But really it was just it was kind of a culmination of a year of work with the
Mhm.
team and getting the opportunity to interview someone like Demarcus on the day that he signed, getting him after he's had a couple other interviews and getting him comfortable enough with various questions that he chose my conversation to drop that
Yeah.
that statement. So I certainly owe him one because it was a fun 24 hours,
Mhm.
but that's all it is. It's 24 hours, and you got to look to the next story and look to the next interview.
And you mentioned how the original video wasn't posted to your account. When that video gained popularity, was your phone already blowing up, or did it take you a little while to realize how popular this video had become?
Yeah, well, it was a little bit of a funny timeline because the I did that interview at the Virginia Mason Athletic Center, which is Seahawks
Yeah.
headquarters in their indoor practice facility, and it ended right around 3:40 in the afternoon, and I was due to be on a local sports radio station to speak with them at 4 o'clock. So I looked at my phone, saw that traffic was okay, raced home, got to the door like 5 minutes before I was supposed to be on air, did that interview, and then maybe by like 4:15, 4:20 at the latest, I was off that interview. And by that time, barely over a half an hour, it had already gone viral. It was all over the
Yeah.
place. And so at that point, everyone was reposting this other clip. And so I was doing my best to kind of whack a mole and reply to those posts with a link to the full interview. So at least,
Yeah.
there might be some folks that head over to the YouTube channel to see the whole thing.
And I believe that ended up being your most viewed live stream on your YouTube channel. I think I checked earlier, sitting around 59,000 views. So it did end up
Yeah.
performing pretty well.
Yeah, it did. It did. And, that's one that I made sure got in front of people and helped push it along. So, um, yeah, it definitely did really well. I would say in general, like it has the most views, but I think my best performing overall live streams were my free agent, my marathon 7 hour free agent streams
Yeah.
ended up really being the thing that kicked a lot of stuff off this month.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Demarcus Lawrence, he signed a 3-year contract worth up to $42 million. He played in just 4 games with the Cowboys last season after suffering a foot injury and will be turning 33 years old before the start of the new season. I believe he's going into his 12th NFL season. What can we expect to see from him in 2025?
You know, I talked to him about that, and one of the, if not the main reason that he chose to come to Seattle is former Dallas Cowboys defensive line coach Adam
Mhm.
Dirty was hired last year
Yeah.
by Mike McDonald to be their defensive line coach. And last year, Adam Dirty recruited Jonathan Hankins, who had been a nose tackle for the Cowboys, to come up to Seattle. This year, he recruited Demarcus Lawrence. And part of what Demarcus talked about in that conversation was he believes that Dirty is someone who can get the most out of him, and he's looking forward to working with him again. But it is a reality. 30, like Father Time's undefeated, as they say, and I think the most encouraging thing for Demarcus Lawrence is yes, he had the Liz Frank injury to his foot, but in the games that he played, he put up some pretty big numbers from a pass rushing perspective, and he's been an elite run defender his pretty much his whole career. So there's reason to hope that in a system where he won't have to be a primary pass rusher, they can control his snaps and really amplify his impact in the snaps that he's on the field.
Yeah, now speaking of some older players that the Seahawks picked up, we have to talk about Cooper Kupp, who they recently added on a 3-year, $45 million deal. Kupp is going to be 32 years old at the start of the season. What can we expect his impact to look like with Seattle, coming off 3 straight seasons with under 850 receiving yards, obviously after that Triple Crown season he had in 2021?
Yeah, it's a fascinating offseason for the Seahawks in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, Matthew, they got a little bit older at receiver and they got a little bit younger or considerably younger at quarterback. And um, with the receiver situation with Cooper Kupp, he's been very clear that if he didn't feel like he was still capable of doing the things that he was, that he can, his mind's eye can imagine, he wouldn't be playing anymore. And if you actually see the games that he played in, other than toward the end of the season, which like is worth noting, there's definitely a drop off toward the end of the season, but for a lot of last year, he was doing Cooper Kupp things. And this is a guy that has never depended on great speed to
Yeah.
win his routes. He's been a savvy route runner. He sets people up. He understands leverage. He understands how to beat leverage. That doesn't erode quite as quickly. So as long as he can, stay on the field, which is a legitimate concern, he still has everything he needs to be a very good receiver for the Seahawks. And it's also really important to note that the Seahawks are moving to an offensive scheme under Clint Kubiak that is going to be a little bit more run centric and is going to ask blocking from its receivers more than it has in the past. And that's something that Cooper Kupp is one of the best in the league at doing. So he brings more than just that. He also brings the leadership to a room that I think could use it.
Yeah, now you made a comment on this earlier. Obviously, the Seahawks signed Sam Darnold to a 3-year, $100 million contract.
Hmm.
How's this move going to affect Seattle going forward? What can we expect to see from Darnold out there with a much different looking offense than what Seattle had previous seasons?
That's the big question, Matthew.
Mhm.
It's I would say that John Schneider and Mike McDonald and Clint Kubiak all have their fingers crossed because this was not their original plan. They wanted to have Geno Smith back. They wanted to have DK Metcalf back. They ended up with neither. And Sam Darnold, while he had a far superior statistical season to Geno Smith last year, he's only done it once.
Mhm.
And so he's going to have to prove it again. Part of the reason Sam Darnold chose to come to Seattle is because he wants to prove that he can be a multi-season starter for a team, and the Seahawks present an opportunity for him to do that. So, you know, it's going to be an offense that's going to look to run the ball. It's going to be an offense that runs outside zone and tries to make Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, some of those players, the running backs, a more featured part of the offense. It's an offense that's probably going to feature the tight end a little bit more than the Seahawks offense has in recent history. And it's going to be an offense that features Jackson Smith and Jigba as the number
Yeah.
one. And, I think there's reasons to be optimistic. The Seahawks offense does not need to be top five in order for the Seahawks to be a very solid team, playoff contending, maybe, getting further than the first couple rounds. They've got a great defense, and what they really just need is for this offense to be top half of the league. And there's reason to think this team could cause some trouble for others in the NFC.
And you talked about how Darnold's season last year was one of or his best statistically.
Hmm.
However, you have to look at how he ended the season. He really struggled in the Vikings 29-7 loss against the Rams in the wild card round of the playoffs. How much does this concern you about his ability to potentially step up in big game situations like this one?
Yeah, it's absolutely concerning, and it's not something that's new for him. Holding onto the ball a little bit too long has been something that's kind of plagued him at times during his career. He also, though, balances that with having more explosive passes last year than any
Yeah.
quarterback in the NFL. So one of the things you will see is if you look at the quarterbacks that hold on to the ball the longest in the league, they're going to be one of two kinds of players. They're going to be a player that gets sacked a ton and is not a very productive quarterback. Or two, you're going to, I would also say sometimes just a scrambling quarterback, someone who uses their legs a lot. Two, you're going to see a player that creates a lot of big plays. And Sam Darnold can kind of be both. He's actually a little bit more athletic than people give him credit for. He can move around the pocket, he creates extra time, and he's going to have to find the balance. I think one of the things that really was impressive about Sam Darnold last year and I think showed growth in his game was he learned to check the ball
Yeah.
down if there wasn't a big play down the field. And
Mhm.
I think that got away from him a little bit in that Rams game. I would also say his offensive line and his play caller didn't help him in that Rams game either. So it's never just one person. Sam Darnold talked about that game. He knows he's got work to do. And I think the thing the Seahawks have to be hoping for is that he's very committed to proving that that was an aberration and that the 14 games that they won were actually more the rule.
Yeah, and sticking with Darnold, the Seahawks also picked up Andrew Janoko to be their new quarterbacks coach. How might this move affect Darnold going forward?
Well, Janoka's a guy that's got a pretty good history with quarterbacks
Mhm.
dating back to his time at the Vikings, and he and Clint Kubiak have a lot of time together. And so this is a guy that's coached receivers before, and he moved into the quarterback coach position in Minnesota and was able to help those guys in that room understand that position a little bit better and how to hit receivers at specific windows and help work with them. So I think Janoko is a talented quarterbacks coach. He's a young guy that's going to put in a ton of hours with Sam Darnold and whoever else the Seahawks bring into that quarterback room. And I think it's worth noting Janoko was down on the field at the NFL Combine while the quarterbacks were working out there because while Sam Darnold's 27, coming off a great year, signed a big contract, there's no doubt the Seahawks are going to be looking to add a rookie as well to that room. And who knows? It depends on how things fall in the draft, but I would expect them to add another player for Andrew Janoko to be coaching.
Yeah, and a lot of the major free agents have already been signed. Is there anyone specifically, any names of players that you would like to see Seattle target with free agency, still going on, obviously, as I mentioned, a lot of the big names gone. Who's left that they could potentially go after?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to be watching for an interior offensive lineman, but
Mhm.
honestly, none of them are particularly interesting. They'll sign somebody. Maybe it'll be a Dalton Risner. Maybe it'll be a Dylan Reduns, Will Hernandez. I mean, there's a number of guys it could be. All of them come with really big question marks around their performance. As far as, a name that probably less people are talking about, and I haven't checked to see if he's still available, but I think he is, the ageless Calais Campbell. The Seahawks do not have a nose tackle really on the roster right now. They're going to need to draft one. It's a good draft for nose tackles. But adding someone like Calais Campbell to the middle of that line, I think, would be a sneaky good addition for any team, especially a Seahawks team that is looking for a nose tackle in the middle.
Yeah, and the Seahawks have the 18th overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. You mentioned how you want to see them get a nose tackle at some point in the draft. Are there any specific players or positions that you would like to see them take with this first selection?
Yeah, because they missed out on Will Fries, who is kind of their main target on the interior line
Yeah.
in free agency. They have a need on the interior line. I think it's too big of a need to wait until the 50th pick, which is their next selection in the second round. So I think they're going to have to go offensive line in the first pick. I think they'll probably try to trade back. It wouldn't be surprising because 18 is going to be pretty high to call some of the names that would make sense for them. But the two names that stand out for me are Gray Zabel, who can play center or guard, as well as Donovan Jackson, who played tackle last year for Ohio State, but primarily as a left guard. Either one of those players would be a really good addition to an already young and already pretty talented Seahawks line, but it's inexperienced, and so those guys would both be, I think, good additions for John Benton, their new offensive line coach, to work with.
Now, speaking of the offensive line position, just under 2 weeks ago, Seahawks offensive lineman Stone Forsythe signed a deal with the New York Giants. Forsythe is the only offensive lineman with a double digit allowed pressure rate since 2021. However, he's just 27 years old. Are you glad that the Seahawks decided to move on from him, or do you think he might have deserved another year to prove himself?
Well, I obviously wish Stone Forsythe the best, and
Mhm,
and hopefully wherever he's with the Giants now, hopefully that
mhm.
works out for him.
Yeah.
He did not do what he needed to do to earn another contract with the Seahawks. And, he might feel that that's how they used him, or the coaching or the scheme. All those things could be possible. The reality is he had plenty of opportunity and was just not good enough. So I'm not surprised the Seahawks let him go. They also moved on from George Fant, who they'd brought in to be a swing tackle. He was a veteran. I think George Fant's probably going to retire after having some injuries this past year. So, they've got some need as a swing tackle. They signed a guy named Josh Jones, who
Mhm.
played with the Ravens last year, but there's probably still a need to probably draft another swing tackle, coming up here in about a month.
And you touched on this name a little earlier. On January 26th, the Seahawks hired Clint Kubake to be their new offensive coordinator. What changes can we expect to see in 2025 with Kubake at the helm?
Yeah, Clint Kubiak obviously comes from a long family lineage of offensive coordinators in the NFL. His dad, Gary Kubiak, worked with,
Mhm.
John Elway and Mike Shanahan back in the day, and his brother coaches for Kyle Shanahan as their offensive coordinator. And all that Shanahan style offense is basically similar in that you're going to have a lot of wide zone run game. You're going to have under center game. You're going to have play action off of that,
Mhm.
bootlegs
Yeah.
off of that. Everything's meant to look the same so that defensive linemen and linebackers are having to, honor the run to the outside while also having to prepare for a potential bootleg or, flood patterns to the opposite side of the field. So it puts linebackers in a lot of conflict. And
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think that's what you're going to see from this team is, really trying to get the speed of Kenneth Walker to the outside to threaten there, and then get, guys like Marquez Valdez Scantling screaming up the other side He had, I want to say, 6 touchdowns in 8 starts
Yeah.
for Clint Kubiak last year, and I think 6 touchdowns was his career high in any other 17 game season. So I think that's you're going to see a lot of run, you're going to see a lot of play action, and you're going to see some deep shots from that offense.
Yeah, and staying with the coaching staff, on February 13th, 2024, the Seahawks hired Ryan Grubb as their offensive coordinator. He was fired on January 6th, 2025, less than 1 year after he was hired. Was it an appropriate decision to fire him after just the first season? And this wasn't necessarily the worst Seahawks offense that we've seen in a while. They did finish 10-7 with the second best record in the NFC West.
Yeah, it was a big jump for Ryan Grubb from,
Mhm.
going from a college offensive coordinator to an NFL offensive coordinator without ever having coached in the NFL. That is a very rare path to walk.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of examples of college OCs who have never coached at any position or any level in the NFL going straight to the NFL as an offensive coordinator and a play
Mhm.
caller. And I think, Ryan Grubb started out okay, but it eroded pretty quickly, and he stopped having answers for how to handle what the NFL defenses were throwing at him. He put the offensive line in a really tough situation with the amount of passes that he was having Geno Smith drop back to throw. He got away from the run game in some pretty key moments. He did not have great answers on third down, especially third and short or in the red zone. And ultimately, I think the key thing was all of that could have been forgiven and chalked up to like learning in his first year, but I don't think he and Mike McDonald had a shared vision of how the offense was going to evolve. And when that's the case, you got to move on. And it's not necessarily a negative thing about Ryan Grubb. It's just a Ryan Grubb and Mike McDonald had never coached together, and they found out during that year probably not a good match. So I think I expect Ryan Grubb's going to recover and still be a very good offensive coordinator, but it just wasn't meant to be with this version of the Seahawks.
And running back Kenneth Walker has been in some heavy trade talks recently with the Las Vegas Raiders. What does the future hold for Walker in Seattle coming off his worst season with the Seahawks? Obviously, he was a little banged up, but in terms of, you know, how much he did, it just wasn't what we necessarily saw from him during his first two seasons in the league.
Yeah, I don't know if there's really heavy trade talk. I think there are Twitter rumors accounts that throw things out there and may or may not be credible. I would lean towards may not. Is it possible that Pete Carroll called about his former running back, in their new, team? Sure. Do teams call about all sorts of players all the time? Absolutely. Does it mean that they're really actively, possibly going to be traded? Not necessarily. So I think this is a big year for Kenneth Walker. He's in his contract year. That whole 2022 class for the Seahawks is in their contract year. That includes Kenneth Walker. That includes Reek Woolen. That includes Kobe Bryant, who's now become a starting safety, Charles Cross, Abe Lucas. There's a lot of names on that list. I think that they have a choice to make with Kenneth Walker, and durability is going to be a key part of how they make that decision because there's no doubt about his talent. There's no doubt about his home run ability. But they also got a glimpse last year that Zach Charbonnet, who was drafted a year later, can be pretty darn productive himself when he's in the lineup. And this also happens to be one of the deepest running back drafts ever. So I don't think it's crazy that the Seahawks would be willing to move on from Kenneth Walker. I also think it's pretty unlikely.
And there have also been many trade rumors surrounding Stephon Diggs, or not trade rumors, he's a free agent, but surrounding Stephon Diggs potentially teaming up with his former quarterback. How likely is it that Diggs goes to Seattle and, stays with Sam Darnold, who was obviously his quarterback in Minnesota when Diggs played there?
Uh, I don't think that Diggs would be a logical addition for the
Mhm.
Seahawks. They've already added 3 receivers now,
Mhm.
and I think that this offense a lot of times is going to be 12 or 21 personnel where they have 2 receivers on the field. So adding a fourth receiver when they also have a guy like Jake Bobo, they have Cody White, they have Derek Young, they have some other guys already on there. Plus, I think they'll likely add a rookie in the draft.
Mhm.
I just don't think an injured Stephon Diggs makes sense to bring into Seattle.
Yeah, and I talked about this earlier. The Seahawks had a 10-7 record in 2025, finished with the second best record in the NFC West. What do you think are realistic expectations you've set for this team this upcoming season?
I don't think it's a point where it's realistic to set expectations until the draft has happened. The Seahawks
Yeah.
have 5 picks in the first 92 of this draft, and the amount of change that can come from those picks is massive. So, what would the Rams fans have said last year before they drafted Jared Verse and Braden Fisk? What would have
Yeah.
the Commanders fans said before they had Jaden Daniels? Like it can be massively impactful. So, um, what I will say is the Seahawks have most of their defense back from last year, and that was a top 10 defense. And that was a top 10 defense, even though during the middle of the year, they were one of the worst defenses in the NFL. So when they had their guys, they were really a top 5 defense. That's what I think is the realistic goal for them this year. And then it's just a matter of how good can they get on offense. And they were around 18th in the NFL last year, depending on which metric you look at. If they can get towards the top 12, then I think you're looking at certainly at least a 10-win team and maybe a little bit more than that.
Yeah, now I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things up. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports broadcaster and journalist like me, what would it be?
Hmm. I mean, I don't know that I'm the expert on that question, but I'll tell you my answer is I think if you want to be a writer, write every day. If you want to be a broadcaster, broadcast every day. There's real benefit in repetition and finding your voice and finding what works and what doesn't. And I think the only way to really refine your craft is to do it over and over and over again. So that's probably my biggest recommendation. And I think you're already doing a great job by reaching out and talking to people. And that takes a lot of guts. And I'm glad that, it sounds like you've had some success reaching out and having some conversations with some cool folks.
Yeah, I really appreciate that advice, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up? Where can they find some of your work?
Oh, well, I hope they give your show and channel and wherever else a like and a subscribe and support you. As far as my stuff, it's just at Hawk Blogger wherever you look. So YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all those places. You can find me at Hawk Blogger and you find all our content up there. So yeah, that'd be great to see folks over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you check out some of that work. Again, big thanks to Brian Nemhauser for being the 53rd ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.